This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber.
And I'm Kenny. Today on the show, I sat down with our very own Amber, host of the show you're listening to right now. Amber runs a cute and wonderful Ryutama actual play on her podcast, Shapeshift. She also occasionally yells at me about goblins on her Magic the Gathering show, Red Mage, Blue Mage. Today, though, I'm giving you the chance to get to know Amber a bit better and to do some deep dives into her processes for building worlds, making NPCs on the fly, and conceptualizing monsters. Amber is one of my greatest GM inspirations, and I hope you can learn from her as much as I have. So, without further ado, it's Babble time. No, that's no good either. Welcome, everyone, to a very special edition of Tabletop Babble. I'm Kenny, and I am joined today by my co-hosts, one of them anyway. It's Amber.
Hey, it's me. It's Amber.
A.K.A. at Rocket Orca, A.K.A. Queen of the Goblins, A.K.A. Do you have any other aliases?
No, I have no other aliases. Nope.
Well, we thought it'd be good. We had an interview with James a while ago where he was asking us some sort of getting to know you questions about TTRPGs, how we got our start in TTRPGs, what kind of writing we do, what kinds of things we like. I thought it'd be fun to do a deeper dive with you since you're kind of the central host of the show.
Well, yeah, and this was also my idea because it's just a way to break up and give me the space to talk with the co-hosts of the show and kind of give me a break in between lots of social interaction with a lot of different and new people. And we thought it would also be fun to potentially add different kinds of episodes. We don't know what that is yet, but maybe like game spotlights, like a book club. I don't know. We're thinking about it, but to start off, I thought it'd be good to do an interview with the co-host. So today, Kenny's interviewing me. So, Kenny, what kind of questions you got?
All right, you're going into the hot seat, the Tabletop Babble hot seat. So I've got some real scorchers.
My butt is burning from the heat. That's the only reason.
Okay, so first off, real softball basic question. What do you do? I'll ask the same question that we always do. What do you do in the TTRPG space, Amber?
Oh my gosh, what don't I do? So 2020 was a lot of actual plays for me. I was on a lot of stream shows, Roll to Play Network, WebDM plays. I did a show, Torg Eternity, for them. Roll to Play, I was on Powered by the Players, which is a really good actual play podcast highlighting Powered by the Apocalypse games. I do lots of stuff for Geekspective, obviously. But yeah, that's pretty much what I did in 2020 as far as like games, actual plays were concerned. And then but really my true passion, I really, graphic design is my passion. And so I've been doing a lot of logo design for games, page layout for games, art for games. I've been doing a lot of that. I'm hoping to do more in 2021. But yeah, that's basically it. I just cut myself off real sharp there. But yeah, that's basically what I do. Play a lot of games, do art and design for games.
And you are also a runner for several podcasts.
Oh yeah, I mean, at Geekspective, I'm basically on every show at some capacity. I'm basically on every show in some capacity. Either I'm the host or co-host or GM or a player, but for me specifically, Shapeshift has been my baby podcast. That's my show that I host and also am the GM of, and it is a show all about my growth as a GM. So I started GMing about 4 years ago now. That's ridiculous. 4 years already of GMing. And I've told people that about 80% of every game I've ever run is captured in that podcast.
Which is kind of wild to think that you have this chronicle of your entire history as a GM. Have you ever gone back and listened to like the old stuff?
To be honest, not recently. I have re-listened to some episodes of... I can kind of give the format of the show to understand more what Shapeshift is. I basically did a lot of one-shots to begin with, so I know what my strengths are. I'm very good at being organized, understand rules, I get stuff like that. I knew that my weakness was improv. Even as a player, I've always been a little bit weak in my improv abilities, and I knew I wanted to improve on that. And so the way I did it was I ran a bunch of one-shots, a lot of very loose mechanics games, or just like one-sheet RPGs like Lasers and Feelings, Honey Heist, which is a hack of that. So a lot of Grant Howitt's games I ran, and those were... I think I did good, and it's because I made sure to play with people I knew really well, that I was comfortable being super silly and goofy with. But yeah, so a lot of that show was like 2 episodes of a one-shot kind of situation. And I went back and I listened to maybe like the Monster Hearts 2 one, because I was going to submit that for an award thing. And then... But really, it wasn't until I started running my campaign did I re-listen to a lot of the campaign episodes. So in Shapeshift, I have a bunch of one-shots, and then I started my first ever campaign, Ryutama. And so my first ever campaign is actually recorded, and I do like listening to those episodes one-off. They're really good. I think I did really well with that campaign.
So I want to save Ryutama for a second here.
Okay.
You were talking about how you felt the biggest thing you needed to improve on in Shapeshift, and a big reason... an impetus for making Shapeshift was you wanted to get better at improv. Do you remember like a moment in the history of Shapeshift or your history as a GM where you felt like you turned a corner on your ability to improv?
Honestly, I want to say even in my first game that I ran, I was impressed with my ability to do give and take. So the first game I ran for Shapeshift was Damn the Man by Hannah Schaefer. And I remember... there was a part that I hadn't planned for, and Josh did something in character that I came up with a really good, like, pushback on, I guess you would say, where I had a cop show up, which was pretty funny. And I was really proud of that moment, because it was like, oh, I can make up stuff, which is so silly because I've been playing games for 7 years at that point. But then I was thinking... other parts that I turning point, I really also liked when I was running Lasers and Feelings, where I did some really creepy sound effects for some guy's head exploding, and I got really into it. And so,
what does that sound like?
I'm not gonna do it. You listen to the show if you want to hear it. It's in the Lasers and Feelings episodes. Sorry
for our audience.
No, they'll have to listen to my other podcast if they want to hear it.
Cross promotion.
But I think from those 2 experiences early on, I was learning that if I allowed myself to get absorbed into the fiction, I didn't have a problem with it going forward. And so after those 2 moments, I mean, I'm serious. They were like literally the first game and then like the 3rd or 4th game. I was like, oh, just lose yourself in the fiction and don't worry about what people are thinking or even what you think. Just become the world, become the situation. And because of those 2 moments, I think that really influenced how I began approaching all of my other games after that.
Yeah, I think that ties in nicely with what I know to be your favorite piece of advice for GMs in general, which is know your world, right?
Yeah, I would say if anybody was asking me, oh, I want to start GMing and I specifically want to do a campaign and I want to do world setting and stuff, and I'm really worried about improving and being able to keep up with my players who obviously will do things that I can't plan for, my advice is always just know your world. Right down to the physics and how things would react to certain situations, how things would respond. Not just NPCs, but the environment and the situations and social stuff. As long as you know how the world will respond to certain behaviors, you'll be fine, I feel like. I mean, of course, it takes time to get to that point, but that's a good, like, thing to keep reminding yourself. Just be your world.
Well, I've said to you previously that one of the things I admire most about you as a GM is your world building. I think listening to your games on Shapeshift, the worlds feel real. They feel lived in. It feels like an actual place, which is really impressive to me. Can you tell me anything about your process? Like, what does it look like? You're going to build, let's say, a town in your campaign. Where do you start? What's the process? What's your step-by-step?
Yeah, so in Shapeshift, the real beginning of me creating and crafting my worlds was when I started the Ryutama campaign, Book of Spring. And of course, I had a session 0 with my players, and it was like kind of like, what do you guys like? What do you guys expect? What are your characters like? Let's kind of like put together a little bit of a foundation. And because they also told me that they were really excited to explore stuff that I created, they were okay with me creating the world around what they had already built initially, and that they just wanted to be allowed to maybe tweak it here and there as we play the game, which obviously I'm totally open to. It's collaborative story building. It's so hard to think about your process because a lot of times for me, it's very amorphous. Sometimes it's me sitting in the shower, literally sitting down in the shower and like just thinking about like a character that I have in my head and then going, where would that character live? Other times it's a very much approach of, well, I want my players to experience X kind of conflict. Well, what kind of conflict would that be? Okay, now I can start building the world around it. Or I'm like, I want them to experience a certain type of good or special like trade or whatever.
So is it safe to say that the location emerges out of something else for you?
Yes, definitely. It's usually incepted by a spark. Like, for instance, we'll talk about Book of Summer, which is my second mini Ryutama campaign, where the first place I wanted them to encounter, spend time with, I know my players. They like drama, NPC drama. They like town dynamics and like conflict and stuff. So, and one of the players, their character is a reporter or a journalist. And it's like, okay, I know that I want there to be some sort of human drama, quote unquote human, because everything in in my world is humanoid. Doesn't necessarily mean they're humans. And so I was like, okay, what kind of conflict do I want there to be? Well, I want there to be a misunderstanding, because a lot of times conflict comes from misunderstanding. And okay, there's two factions. Okay, the two factions, what could they be? What could the misunderstanding be? Well, they're in the north. This is where this one character lives, and we talked about being a mountainous region. So it's timber. There's going to be timber. Okay, what if you had a group that does like lumber? There's a lumber mill. Okay, so what could cause a conflict from the lumber mill? Well, they're harvesting a lot of trees, and there's another group that's environmentalist, and they're upset that there's so many trees being taken, and they don't understand why. Oh, but now this conflict is basically coming from a misunderstanding. The timber company is taking logs because they know that something's wrong in the world, and they're trying to like prepare the doomsday preppers. And the other group doesn't understand that, and then it's just how it kind of like keeps boiling up and boiling up and boiling up. And then it's like, okay. And so then I know that what the characters are going to have to do is they're going to have to interact with that dynamic, that conflict. And so then I start building NPCs around that conflict. And I also know they're going to want to go shopping, because they always want to go shopping. They always want to go eat, and they always want to do X thing. So I make sure that's there. And that's how the world just ends up building. Started from literally, I need some sort of conflict, and then they're in the mountains where there's lots of forests. What could it be?
Logging company.
Yes.
I think, a really basic tenet that came up a lot during your explanation of your process there was the players, and thinking about the kinds of things that they want to do.
Let me just say this. As a GM, for me specifically, of course I want to play the game too, right? Like, there's obviously, I'm a player at the table as much as my players. But if I'm crafting things I don't want to do it just to please myself. I always want to make sure that my players are engaged as well. But then it goes back to like, if I'm creating this table, they know who I am as a person. And if they know who I am as a person, they're probably going to like the same kinds of things that I like. And so as long as I make sure to add things specifically for their characters, it's going to make me happy too. It's a good dynamic to have. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think part of it that you brought up there is your players already have buy-in if they know you. Presumably, if they want to play in your game, they know your style, they know something about you, they're interested in that kind of game. But you still want to cater to what they in particular want.
Yep.
This is reminding me, this might be a tangent, but we allow those on this show, especially when I'm in charge. Jerry Holkins had a quote, I remember from a long time ago, where he was talking about GMing, and he was talking about, in a way, the GM, it's more important that the GM have fun than the players, because your fun is directly affecting the fun of everybody else at the table. What do you think about that quote?
I think so. I mean, if the designated quote unquote leader of the table is having a bad time, how am I supposed to lead a group through anything? It'll be terrible.
And get them to have a good time.
Exactly. We've canceled sessions because I've not been mentally up for it. I don't want to like subject my players to me being in a bad mood, and also subject them to a situation where, yeah, I've designed a scenario purely for them and it doesn't interest me at all. Coming from a creative place, it's like it's really hard to create stuff that doesn't inspire you. Like, you're inspired to do it. So if you're not inspired, then, you know, it's not going to be good for anybody else.
Then what are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Branching off, like I said, I was interested in your world building process. I am equally interested in your NPC creation process. Is that equally amorphous?
It usually starts with a voice or demeanor. One of my most quote unquote famous NPCs in the Book of Spring campaign was a guard who really had his sole purpose was to provide a map of the town.
As written by you ahead of time.
Yeah, like literally there's a guard there, here's a map, what would you like to know about the town? And he would tell them about the town. But I was like, oh, I'll just make a voice up for him when they greet him right on the spot. And I have been watching a lot of IT Crowd, and I really like, even though Matt Berry's character is awful, I love Matt Berry's character and most characters he plays and stuff. He's just a complete skis-ball, but also like exuberant. And so I just went, hello, welcome to Stormbrook. They just became enraptured by this guard and just kept asking him personal questions. And I just had to keep in character answer these questions with the idea of Matt Berry in my mind and speaking like that. And it ended up becoming a 3-session arc about his birthday because of on a whim. That's an on a whim NPC. NPCs that I build for specific reasons to delight my players usually starts with either a scenario that I want them to get information, right? NPCs usually serve a purpose. So I would have NPCs that would like give them hooks, or NPCs that need help, or NPCs that, you know, do have an actual bigger story component to the overall campaign. And in those cases, I do tend to focus on why they would have that information or why they would need help. And from there, kind of put a personality around it. So another example I think is a really good one is preparing for the guard's birthday. They had to go collect flowers to make arrangements for his birthday party. And I was like, well, I want them to meet an NPC who needs help because they're going to be something that they might meet later on. I want them to, I set things up in ways that they can meet later on in the campaign. So they have that call back to stuff. I was like, well, what could they meet later on in the campaign that would be fun? And so I was like, well, if they had a caterpillar that turned into a moth, that would be really cool, because there's moths in this other place that I have set up for them to reach in the future. Okay, so they'll have this little caterpillar who needs help finding his like special leaf that he was carrying, and the whole idea of like, well, why is he here? Well, there's probably a bird that picked him up and dropped him off in the field. And so I made this character. I made him completely adorable and helpless and sad and talked like a baby. And I presented it to them, and they hated this character so much.
I don't think that's a completely fair assessment. I think one of the players in particular hated this caterpillar.
Well, and it's so funny too, because one of my players is my brother, and so we have a brother-sister dynamic, and so we're okay with arguing with each other. And this caterpillar's like, can you help me find my leaf? And my brother's character is like, you ate your leaf. And it just became this back and forth dynamic of like arguing and trying to prove points, and this caterpillar getting huffy. But like I thought in my head that they would love and want to help this caterpillar, and they would help it, and the caterpillar would remember, and it would like bestow some blessing on them later on or something. But instead they fought with it. And that's also really good too. Like, that is a memorable moment. I'm completely okay with how they received that NPC. It's just really funny.
And that was also, thinking about it now, another good like milestone of your improv ability. You get thrown a curveball on how this is going to go, and it turns into this really fun interaction.
Yes. I definitely feel like I've gotten to the point now where change is challenging and not show-stopping. It's a challenge, and I approach it with as a challenge mindset instead of I don't know what to do. So I now look at these improv situations as more of a puzzle, or just like, it's also like trusting yourself too, I think. Like, I've learned to trust that I have the knowledge in my head to do things, that I can draw upon anything in my consumption of media or knowledge of story structure or my players, that will allow for me to recall it in a way that is fun and entertaining. And in the episode I had with Katie May, we talked about like, how do you get better? You just do it a lot, right? So I've just been doing it a lot now. 4 years. Woo-woo. Hey, Kitty.
Hey, Amber.
I have a question for you.
All right, shoot.
Of all the planeswalkers, which one's butt do you want to touch the most?
Let's go with my gut. Karn. That ass is sculpted. Literally. Speaking
of butts, you better believe this is Red Mage, Blue Mage. Kitty, I'm really bad at this. That's our awesome Magic the Gathering podcast on the Geekspective network. Oh my god, I can't stop laughing.
And neither can you. When you're listening to us talk about magic and lore and how to build commander decks and Oathbreaker decks, and us actually playing against each other, which is my favorite part.
Right, and you can hear us do all these things on Spotify, iTunes, or other major platforms like YouTube now as well.
And you can also send dank memes at us, dank magic memes at RedBlueMTG. We're down for that, sure.
Yeah, the danker the better.
That's what I always say.
All right, bye.
On the same kind of note, as far as characters being thrown curveballs and Mr. Becky Ann, do you have any advice for GMs on how to make a good NPC on the fly? Like someone you weren't expecting to be an NPC, or if you need to conjure an NPC?
Conjuring NPCs, for me, it's just, I think of a state of mind an NPC is in right at the bat, like right when they meet somebody. So let's say a NPC I conjured on the fly recently was that her store was vandalized. And so the state of being that NPC was in at that moment was upset and flustered. So as I started talking upset and flustered and tried to give the characters information about the vandalism, my players started projecting their own perceptions of that character on them. And then I just took that. And I think if you're open to what the players' reactions and their own comments about NPCs, and then you take that, you can then use it and go with it. And actually it makes it for a better experience overall, because it just confirms that they were right. And then they're going to be more engaged with the character if they got that first perception read on them. So in my flustered upsetness, she must have came across as self-righteous. And so they picked that up for some reason. And then they just expanded on it by like doing the table talk that we usually do when we're playing games, right? And I just doubled down on that. And she became like the town gossip who knew everything and took credit for everything. And so she just became that character, Willow. And it made it so easy. Like, start with a state of mind the character is in when they're presenting, try to emulate that state of mind, and then listen to how your players are perceiving that character, and be okay with just, yep, that's exactly what she's like. You got it. 100%. She's totally self-righteous. She's the one who's got like that massive text group. She's got that Facebook Messenger chat up on her, fantasy cell phone, totally getting in people's business.
I think that makes total sense. And I think part of what makes that work is if your players react to something, like if that's their first reaction, then you know that it's appealing to them in some way. Like, it got their attention. That's the thing that stood out. So why not let that be a guide as to what this character could be?
Yeah, I agree. I think I know as a player myself, having played RPGs for about 8-9 years before I started GMing, that I really remember those instances where the NPC was collaboratively built and we helped contribute to what that NPC was. And I think it creates a more lasting thing. When you have your hand in something, when you become involved in something, I think that allows, obviously, that you establish a connection, a memory with that, and then therefore it lasts with you.
Yeah. I'd be interested to ask your players. I don't know what they would say. If I asked them, like, is Becky Ann an Amber character or like the group's character?
That'd be a good question. I don't know. They are very excited to see him again in this campaign. I'll tell you that much.
It has to happen. Oh, one other thing I did want to point out about your explanation. I really liked your explanation of how you make NPCs on the fly, or how you go with the flow when it comes to NPCs that you're introducing and your players' reactions to them. You said there's that satisfaction that your player gets when they're interacting with an NPC and they're like, ha, I nailed it. I knew it. It reminds me a little bit of how I think about puzzles. I like giving real simple puzzles sometimes so that players get the easy payout of like, ha, I'm so smart. I've never thought about doing the same thing with characters and giving them the same quick payout of like, I thought this person was suspicious and they're suspicious. Or I thought this person was self-righteous and they are.
Right. I think people in general just like the feeling of being right, or like having things confirmed. I think about it in stories, right? Like,
or watching a TV show.
Yes, exactly. Where, let's get into it, Game of Thrones, where you have character setups that you can see the trajectory of these characters, but if they don't pay off the way that they're being set up, it's just dissatisfying. It's horrible. It's not good. Like, it doesn't make sense. And so I think the same thing when you're creating these NPCs or PCs or anything in your games, it can even go for places or objects. And I think because we are doing all of this in theater of the mind, and we have like 5 people building images in our minds, right? There's nothing we really can look at. When I recently introduced a restaurant called the Maple Table, and they all decided it was sticky because it's got maple syrup all over it. And I was like, no, it is not sticky. And they all went, oh, come on. And I was like, fine. There's some syrup on the ground. Fine. It could be that way. They're like, well, in our memories, it was completely covered. I'm like, fine, you can have it. Because honestly, I hadn't really thought that much about the maple table. And it was okay. But I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely a thing where sometimes you have to say no, but other times when it's like just flavor like that, like, it doesn't really matter. It's more fun anyway.
True. Little change of topic here. I'm going to ask you a lawyer question. This is a question that I already know the answer to.
Okay.
Would you say that you focus on monsters in your games?
Do I focus on monsters? No. I would say monsters aren't a big focus in my games.
That's the correct answer. That's the answer I was looking for. So that was just a setup to my next question. Okay, so you don't focus on monsters in your games. So how do you think of monsters in your game? I think it's interesting then in a game where monsters don't play a big role, but there are still monsters in the game, right?
Yes.
So how do you think about monsters?
Kenny, you know me, and you know I like things that are layered. And when I think about monsters in my games, specifically when we say my games, I really only run one campaign. Well, I've got Petal of Grove as well. Monsters to me is usually a perception thing. There are true legitimate creatures that are monstrous, but monsters can be lots of things. I think I look at situations as being monstrous as well. I think of things, misunderstanding is a huge theme in a lot of things I do, and I think monsters can be created out of misunderstandings. So a lot of times when I build a monster, I'm usually thinking, why would something become monstrous? What happened? So, for instance, there was a scenario in a game where these creatures were destroying wood, stockpiles of wood, and the adventurers had to figure out what was going on. And they came across these moles that were monstrous, right? They had like black ichor coming out of their eyes. They're eating all this wood, and it's because there's grubs in the wood. And to me, it was like, well, this is a monster. This is a problem, right? There are these creatures. They are mindless. They are hungry. They are destroying things. They don't have any sentience to it. But why? Why are they doing this? And there is a bigger reason to it. And I like to think of things like that. Like, what happened to a creature that is making it do something and behave different, right? A monster, I feel like, is something that we do not inherently understand and are afraid of. So a lot of times I put things on either a creature like the mole situation where something is happening to it, we don't understand, it's behaving erratically in a way that is terrifying and destroying our property, therefore it is a monster. But the creature itself isn't a monster, it's just a mole, but what happened to it, right? Same with situations that get out of hand. Greed can be monstrous. Why does X person... What is happening? Why is this person exploiting this group of people for their own gain? Well, there's a reason to it. What's that motivation? So that's kind of how I approach my quote-unquote monster designs. Something that we don't understand, behaving in a way that doesn't make sense, that is scary, to me is a monster. And that can be a creature, that could be a person, that could be a place. In my campaign, they haven't come across places yet that are monstrous, but I have them planned. So yeah, does that make sense? Like that's my mental approach to monster design.
It does, yeah. To encapsulate it, it sounds like you subscribe to the Studio Ghibli school of monsters and villains.
I guess it's in a lot of stuff too, if you think about it. It's not just encapsulated in Studio Ghibli, but that's a really good, like Princess Mononoke is a really good one. Why did the boar god curse Ashitaka? Well, he was shot with the iron from the woman in the forge area, and the iron buried and cursed it. You know, it hurt so much he became cursed. I really, really like that a lot.
So that gets me to my next question, my follow-up there. Why do you think that appeals to you? It appeals to me too, but why does that speak to you?
Because I like understanding why. And I also feel like most things can be explained. And it's like a puzzle. I like history and chains of events and how things interact with each other. And again, going back to, like I said, my themes of misunderstanding, I'm a person who likes to get to the root of problems. So I think you will see that reflected in a lot of the things that I design and put forth. I put a lot of thought, maybe too much thought. No, I think it's a good amount of thought into my situations and scenarios. I tend to think several steps out and several steps back of why and how something happened. But yeah, I think that's basically it. My personality is one of love those layers, baby.
For sure. Add some complexity. Makes it feel more real, and also makes it maybe more satisfying when you resolve whatever this conflict is, and that you've understood it.
Yep.
Very cool. That kind of answers another question. Villains, I feel like, are the same thing. You gave an example of the monsters that do that with the moles. Can you give me an example of a villain that sort of fit that bill in your campaign?
So this again came from a situation where I presented an NPC in a way that my characters read as suspicious, and I ran with it because I hadn't really planned anything for this encounter. I wanted to see, usually I let them like play around in a town, put some little like feelers out for what they're thinking, and then I turn that into like the arc, right? And so the mayor of the town is came across as suspicious, right? This isn't Book of Spring. This is spoiler alerts if you want to listen to my show, but it's still a good listen, I think. I've re-listened to this recently, so it's pretty funny in my opinion. But I like to entertain myself. So the mayor they read as suspicious. And so then it's one of those things, well, what could he be doing that is villainous, monstrous? This behavior is not as erratic, not rational, and is causing fear. Well, I came up with this idea that he basically is trying to live this, like, mayor life and was, like, upset with his family that he didn't, like, it was a class thing, right? He's like, they are of the earth and I want to be of the city kind of situation. And so he was causing a lot of problems and was like undermining an old treaty, and there was some deception, and he was stealing goods, and he took a special bee from the forest and he was using that for his own means because he was also addicted to honey. It became very layered very fast. But the core concept was his motivations were of, I don't want to be associated with my family that I look down on. And that went against my brother's character's belief, where he felt like family was important. And it was like very good to make a character, an NPC, that directly butts heads with another with another PC's core belief.
Kind of a Batman Joker situation.
Yes. The minute that you put a character that is diametrically opposed to another PC's core belief, it also gives the PC opportunity to really decide if they want to act on that core belief, if that makes sense for their character too. And it was an early game. And so my brother did. He took the bait, as it were, and doubled down on his belief and just hated that mayor. And that makes for a good villain. When you just, everything that somebody does is just repugnant to you, then I think you've got a pretty good villain. Did that answer anything? I felt like I was rambling.
Yes. No, it definitely did.
Okay.
Yeah, I love including villains that are just completely counter to what a PC believes. Or not even villains, but antagonists, I guess.
Sure.
And that can lead to interesting things. Like, for example, in my Candy Crush Saga game, we had Troy playing Dwarwin, the sort of bumbling, awkward, nerd dwarf tinkerer and artificer, and I put opposed to him a very pristine, elegant, has her act together elf artificer. And actually, for all of my players, you included, I made a rival at school who kind of opposed you directly in one way or another.
Right. And it was great. And what's so funny is that we ended up condensing it down because I think Dorwin's basically like counterpart or whatever rival was similarly themed to mine, where it was just like this, like, I know everything and I understand all the world and you don't get it. And Dorwin and my character Sprinkle, were really a lot alike in that we were just bumbling. I was bumbling with magic and Dorwin was bumbling with artifice.
Machinery. Yeah.
And so I really became like really upset at Raven. I'm pretty sure we hated each other.
Yeah, she was much more a rival to you by the end of things than she was to Dwarwin. But that's how it goes. You got to go with the flow as the GM.
Yep. I love it. I love it too. And my advice is, like, if you are looking to make good antagonists, just look at your players and what they do and just really like make an annoying character too. Even just an annoying character. Like Josh has made some really good annoying characters over the years. Josh, as in Evil DM Josh, Geekspective.com co-owner, shout out, woo! My GM for like half of my life, it feels like. He makes characters that we still talk about to this day because they were just annoying. We hated them. So good.
Not to be underestimated, a hateable character.
Yes, they're great. They're chef's kiss. Whatever.
Okay, before we go, I have one last question, a lightning round, because I know you could talk about this forever. Lightning round question. What is so great about goblins? I know you love them. What's so cool about them?
So, listener, if you don't know me by now, goblins are my jam. I draw goblins. I think about goblins. In Magic the Gathering, they're my favorite tribe. I love them. I would say unbridled chaos. I think goblins in TTRPG space play a goblin. It's like I'm allowed to be silly. If I'm playing a goblin, I can make all the fart jokes and I can just be myself, essentially, is what I'm saying. Without having to be embarrassed because I'm just a goblin.
What does that say? When I get to be a goblin, I get to be myself. What are goblins? They're unbridled chaos.
It's so funny because I'm not truly that way. Maybe I am. I don't know. Other people, I have a hard time speaking on myself. I feel like unbridled chaos, love it. I can just play a goblin and there's you fart and vomit and do stuff in character as a goblin. It's totally cool. Can't be an elf, but all my elves will turn into goblins if I did that. But I just really think they're fun. I just really like them. I just think they're neat.
In the TTRPG space, I think, if I can make a guess here, I think one of the things that appeals to you is goblins embody that one-shot philosophy of treating your character like a stolen car.
Yes.
Like, every goblin PC is a stolen car character.
I think it really frees you. I really do. It's like, for me, if I start out playing a goblin, I have the potential for depth of character if I wanted to, right? I could discover something about my goblin along the way and my character, and we could add more to it. But it's so nice to go into a start of a campaign. Goblin or gnome. I mean, gnomes and goblins to me are pretty similar in like the chaos field. And it's like, okay, I don't really have to have a strong backstory. I really can just be whimsical and see where that whimsy takes me. You know what I mean? It's okay to not be tied down to any one thing. Right, to start with a goblin or a gnome, for instance. I can find that. It's easier for me to play to find out with those kinds of archetypes to begin with.
So the chaos allows you to make anything happen, potentially.
Yes.
I think that is a beautiful note to end on. Amber, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me.
It was nice to do the talking, lots of the talking this time around. I like it. I should come back on this show more often, huh?
Maybe I'll have you back.
I hope so. I enjoy being on Tabletop Babble. It was really great.
Amber, where can we find you?
So yeah, you should know by now if you listen to this show, but yeah, Twitter, Rocket Orca, that's basically where I put all my stuff. RocketOrca.com is my portfolio if you want to check out my layout design. In 2021, I am looking for more freelance work, just putting it out there. If you have a game you want to be laid out, book-wise, or like a logo design, please, like, check out my portfolio. If it interests you, send me contact on the contact form. Maybe you can work together.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.